Chapter 238 The Spring Breeze Accompanies You for 1,000 Li. The pink Taoist robes of Liu Chicheng slowly fluttered in the light breeze. The supreme demonic cultivator from White Emperor City felt a rare sense of apprehension at this moment. This didn't make any sense. The wisps of spring wind had transformed into a figure beside Chen Ping'an. The figure was a Confucian scholar in azure robes and with white sideburns. He appeared intangible and had a faint smile on his face. Liu Chicheng observed his aura, and he determined that the scholar was already like a candle close to extinguishing. However, there was also an unexplainable feel about the scholar in addition to his feeble aura. If he were an upper 5 tiers qi refiner, he would most likely fail to understand the reason behind this. However, the great demon currently possessing Liu Chicheng's body had been a legitimate immortal tier cultivator during his peak, a 12th tier cultivator. Before betraying the demonic orthodoxy, he had seen far too many capable people and peculiar individuals in White Emperor City, a place that existed among iridescent clouds under the descending water from Yellow River's small world. These people stood at the pinnacle of the world and had caused him to feel restricted and reserved. The more he couldn't see through a person, the more he wouldn't dare to underestimate them. Qi Jingchen looked at Chen Ping'an and used his eyes to reassure the young boy. Standing beside the young boy, he smiled at Liu Chicheng and said, "I'm Qi Jingchen, a disciple of the scholarly sage and a previous mountain master of Mountain Cliff Academy." The possessed Liu Chicheng was slightly dazed. The person standing in front of him wasn't haughty or overbearing, and instead appeared very polite and pleasant. However, scholarly sage, Qi Jingchen, Mountain Cliff Academy, what were all of these random things? Perhaps 2 sagely Confucians had appeared during the 1,000 years he had been suppressed by Mount Longhu's heavenly master. Moreover, the title of scholarly sage wasn't simple at all. The suffix of sage implied that he had the right to possess a godly statue and be honored in the Confucian temples. Not only this, but his godly statue would be near the very front. For example, this was the case with the etiquette sage and the second sage. If anyone were to blame, it would be the half-assed scholar in Liu Chicheng. He was far too unknowledgeable, and he was always messing around with things not relevant to study. He wasn't interested in the situation of the continent. Instead, he liked to dream about using the pitiful amount of knowledge in his brain to woo women and enjoy wonderful times with them. Of course, his attitude also played a big part in this. He felt like Eastern treasured vile continent was a barbaric land, so there would definitely be few cultivators at the upper 5 tiers even if they accumulated for another millennium. As such, he didn't need to pay any attention to this continent. Qi Jingchen casually flicked his sleeve, instantly dispersing the restriction formed by Liu Chicheng. Noble people treated others with sincerity. With the restriction gone, the big-bearded martial artist and the young Taoist priest quickly noticed the peculiar situation over there. They exchanged a glance with each other. Was the person wearing pink Taoist robes the impoverished scholar, Liu Chicheng? Why did he have such a strange fetish of dressing like a woman as well? And who was that senior scholar in azure Confucian robes? Liu Chicheng's eyes narrowed. This Confucian scholar had actually shattered his illusion technique in an instant. Even though his cultivation base could only rival half an unpolished jade tier cultivator at the moment, the profound mystical abilities passed down by the demonic orthodoxy of White Emperor City shouldn't have been so easy to shatter, even if his opponent were a qi refiner at the actual unpolished jade tier. Zhang Shanfeng was just about to stand up and walk over to Chen Ping'an. However, Su Yuanxia immediately grabbed him by the elbow and warned in a quiet voice, "Let's finish our discussion here. We definitely can't get involved with the matters over there. It's best for us to ignore them completely." After saying this, the big-bearded martial artist saw the scholar in azure robes looking over and nodding at them with a smile. Su Yuanxia hurriedly cupped his fists in reply. Qi Jingchen smiled and asked, "Senior, are you White Emperor City's colored glaze pagoda master?" Liu Chicheng nodded and replied in amusement, "What? You've heard of my great name before. Is it infamous and already known by everyone in Middle-earth Divine Continent?" Qi Jingchen shook his head and replied, "No, but I once traveled to the Yellow River and met the city lord of White Emperor City on the riverbank. He mentioned you during our conversation. Liu Chicheng suddenly let loose a torrent of abuse. What absolute bullshit. My senior brother would never exit the city to greet others. With his temper, he'll never leave the city to welcome guests, even if they're Confucian sages personally heading over to visit him out of admiration. At most, he'll only show his face on the city wall amid the iridescent clouds. That would already be giving huge face to you Confucians. Yet, you're trying to tell me that you met him on the riverbank. Good one, you stinky brat. You should have a bottom line even when you're bullshitting. Qi Jingchun couldn't help but chuckle and say, the city lord even asked me to play 3 games of Go with him. However, I was busy at the time, and I needed to immediately return to a Confucian school. Because of this, I still owe him 3 games. Unexpectedly, I never had the opportunity to visit White Emperor City again after that. This is truly a regretful thing. Liu Chicheng raised his hands and forcefully rubbed his cheeks. There were flames of fury burning in his chest. Even though he had broken off with his senior brother, with no more relationship between them to speak of, he still felt respect toward the city lord of White Emperor City in the depths of his heart. This was a very pure feeling of respect and reverence. Thus, he was considering whether he should resolutely attack and destroy the last wisp of this person's damaged soul. Since the colored glaze pagoda master was unwilling to believe him, Qi Jingchun chose not to say anything else. In reality, Qi Jingchun didn't have a bad impression of this great demon from White Emperor City who had returned to the world once again. The first time the great demon had developed killing intent was when the sword saint from Water Combing Nation had wanted to indiscriminately kill the young fox spirit. Among the many scholars who rambled on about morals and virtue, there was no shortage of hypocrites who acted in a sanctimonious manner. Among the many demonic cultivators, there was also no shortage of people who were distinguished and admirable. Qi Jingchun had traveled around the world with senior brother Zhu several times before, so he had naturally come across many such examples. Thus, he wouldn't categorize people in a rigid manner based on their background. In any case, Qi Jingchun was well aware of the shattering colored glaze incident that had occurred in White Emperor City 1,000 years back. Thus, he actually felt a sense of approval toward the great demon standing in front of him. He patted Chen Ping'an's shoulder before smiling at Liu Chicheng and saying, Chen Ping'an definitely can't become your disciple, senior. However, if you're still willing to teach sword techniques, and if Chen Ping'an is still willing to learn, then I'd be happy for that to happen. Liu Chicheng raised a finger and slowly wagged it left and right. What situation are you in right now? Both of us are well aware of this. You're nothing more than a damaged wisp of soul formed by the condensation of some spring breeze. Even if you were a Confucian sage at the upper 5 tiers while you were alive, that was then and this is now. Do you think you have the ability to haggle with me? Qi Jingchun glanced at the great demon dressed in a pink Taoist robe. He could see the killing intent radiating from Liu Chicheng. The great demon was itching to make a move. Members of the demon tribe were innately more reckless than calm, and it was often the case that they would follow their natural instinct of violence when making decisions. This led to many tragedies in the world. It wasn't unfounded for the majestic world to impose so many restrictions on great demons. Someone had once proposed the notion that members of a different species can't be trusted, and that demons and fiends are short-sighted beings who delight in robbing life force from others, with only human teaching encouraging people to sacrifice themselves for just causes. These opinions and remarks were extremely discriminatory toward non-human species. In reality, many sages from the 3 Confucian schools had suggested hunting down all great demons at the upper 5 tiers during the etiquette sages' reign over the majestic world. The sages had wanted to throw these great demons into jail and completely eliminate all future threats. However, the etiquette sage ultimately hadn't adopted this suggestion. Qi Jingchun sighed with slight emotion. At the end of the day, the reasoning of demonic beings all revolved around a single word: survival. They tirelessly pursued survival so that they could grow and become more powerful. By becoming more powerful, they could then act in an unrestrained and wanton manner. However, the reasoning of the majestic world revolved around rules and regulations. The majestic world would act within the boundaries of these rules and regulations to bestow favor upon its inhabitants. Qi Jingchun extended a hand and said with a smile, "If you don't want to speak reason and only want to use brute force, then I'll have no option but to borrow a sword and sever half of your cultivation." The long sword that Chen Ping'an had privately named Subduing Demons slowly slid out of its scabbard inside the locust wood sword case. It rang like a thirsty bird coming across water, and its aura soared into the sky. Liu Chicheng's pink Taoist robes swelled outward, and there was a look of violent rage in his eyes. A vast demonic aura coursed through his body as he chuckled and asked, "Are you sure you have the opportunity to grab that divine weapon that's been specially forged to target demons? Even if I can't obliterate your soul with a single punch, are you not afraid of me smashing Chen Ping'an into meat paste with a single punch?" Qi Jingchun was unfazed, as if he were expounding the most natural principle in the world as he replied, "As long as I remain in the world, no one will be able to harm a single hair of my junior brother." Liu Chicheng roared with laughter, "I don't believe this." However, his pupils suddenly contracted drastically. He was completely enveloped in a faint golden orb right now. However, an opening appeared in the orb above his head, and this was similar to the time when someone had slashed a gigantic hole into Yellow River Small World. The White Emperor City Chaos Origin Golden Light Formation that was protecting Liu Chicheng was easily breached by an attack. What appeared at the start was a tiny black dot. However, this quickly transformed into a thin black line before rapidly expanding and eventually splitting the Golden Light Formation in half. The tip of the sword was only an inch away from Liu Chicheng's glabella. Liu Chicheng was frozen still. Failing to make the first move didn't mean that he was helpless and defeated. Quite the contrary, in fact, as White Emperor City was renowned for its mastery of all kinds of mystical powers and techniques. Just his pink Taoist robe alone was a pseudo-immortal tool that could block Qi Jingchun's sword strike without needing him to move. However, the long sword in the Confucian scholar's hand wasn't the sword forged by Ruan Qiang. Instead, it was that basic locust wood sword. And thus, Liu Chicheng decided to retreat and relent because Qi Jingchun wasn't intending to aggressively suppress him. In a sense, both parties were taking a step back. Qi Jingchun slowly pulled back the wooden sword and returned it back to Chen Ping'an's sword case. He smiled and remarked, "Things would have been completely different if Arliang or senior brother Zhuo had unleashed this sword strike. Did my senior brother genuinely exit the city to meet you, and he even asked you to play 3 games of Go with him?" Liu Chicheng asked. Qi Jingchun nodded in reply. This was the truth. He didn't need to feel proud about this, and he didn't need to conceal it either. In any case, Qi Jingchun had never thought too much about these experiences. This was in stark contrast to the young Qi Chan, who was still feeling complacent and extremely pleased with himself after playing 10 games of Go with the city lord of White Emperor City. Liu Chicheng sighed in emotion. He appeared slightly adrift. It was as if a colored glaze bowl had shattered in his heart. He felt both disappointment and relief. In his mind, that haughty man was ultimately an invincible and flawless person. This was the case regardless of how resentful and furious he was toward his senior brother's heartlessness. Such a person shouldn't have made exceptions for anyone. Liu Chicheng was slightly disheartened as he said, "Since Chen Ping'an and I can't become student and teacher, I won't teach him sword techniques anymore. My abilities aren't that cheap yet. Qi Jingchun, since you're so capable, why don't you teach him by yourself?" He was seemingly a little sullen as he turned around and strode toward the entrance of the old temple. "Please wait for a moment, I have some words to offer you," Qi Jingchun suddenly said. Liu Chicheng turned around with a puzzled expression. However, peculiar lights and spectacular colors suddenly rippled through his mind's lake. Astonishment and wild delight quickly spread over Liu Chicheng's face. He was filled with mixed emotions as he asked, "How very impressive, Qi Jingchun. Someone as capable as you can be a paramount immortal standing at the peak of the mountains regardless of which world you go to. How have you fallen to such a miserable state?" "In what sense have I fallen?" Qi Jingchun countered with a smile. Liu Chicheng faltered upon hearing this. He felt heartfelt admiration toward the Confucian scholar, and he replied, "I must concede my inferiority to you. We can count this as me owing a favor to Chen Ping'an. When I regain my fame in Middle-earth divine continent in the future, Chen Ping'an can come to White Emperor City to look for me." Before leaving the old temple, Liu Chicheng flicked his large sleeve and grabbed the young fox spirit hiding in a dark corner. He left the old temple with her. Just then, the young fox spirit had changed into brand new clothes and slapped several ounces of makeup onto her face. There were patches of red and green, and her appearance was as hilarious as could be. She had most likely mistaken this for the appearance of beautiful women. There was also a book in her robes, her favorite secret piece of reading that she always kept on herself. The book was called Talented Scholars and Beautiful Ladies, and it was badly printed and full of incorrect characters. In any case, this was a collection of romantic tales that also made some mentions of virtuous etiquette relevant to unmarried ladies from powerful clans. For example, they needed to speak in a gentle and soft manner and had to lower their heads in a shy manner when they saw a handsome scholar for the first time. Afterward, they would need to timidly steal a glance before flushing red and lowering their head again. There were many profound principles. The young fox spirit learned many things from these tales. In fact, she would even shed tears time and time again when she read those tales with tragic endings. When Liu Chicheng forcefully grabbed her and took her away, she was initially given a huge fright. However, she immediately became happy again when she saw the handsome young boy standing outside the old temple. There was a red mark on his glabella and a willow branch in his hand. The young fox spirit felt like the heavens were truly kind to her. They had rewarded her with a handsome young boy whom she liked at first sight so soon. Liu Chicheng brought his disciple and the young fox spirit with him as he descended the mountain and headed off into the distance. Only he knew what his destination was. Qi Jingchun looked around and also led Chen Ping'an out of the old temple. They stood in the empty area outside the entrance and used the moonlight to gaze at the night scenery of the distant mountains. People have 3 immortal souls and 7 mortal forms. 1. The 3 immortal souls are embryo light, refreshing spirit, and serene essence. After I died, the fortunes of my souls and forms were mostly returned to this world. I also gave my disciples Li Baoping, Li Huic, and the other children the character Qi. As for you, Zhao Yao, and Song Jixin, I secretly left a wisp of spring wind on 3 of you using the damaged remains of my 3 immortal souls. In fact, my current form can't be viewed as the complete Qi Jingchun. I can only be regarded as a Tao guardian who's accompanying you for a short period of time. Song Jixin's chosen path is becoming more and more distant from the Confucian orthodoxy, but this is simply the nature of worldly affairs. Each person has their own fate and destiny, and relationships like this can't be forced. Zhao Yao was obstructed by Qi Chan at the time, and the circumstances back then forced him to give up the seal with the characters "The world welcomes spring." I had already predicted this, so I told Zhao Yao not to be overly worried about the fate of the seal. Afterward, Zhao Yao came across another fated opportunity during his journey to another continent. However, a slight flaw developed in his mind because of this. As his junior uncle in name, perhaps you'll need to help him once in the future. Chen Ping'an wanted to say something, but he couldn't help but hesitate. Qi Jingchun smiled and said, "You want to say that you can't be regarded as my junior brother because you didn't agree to my teacher's proposal? That's all right. Even if you don't view the old scholar as your teacher, I still view you as my junior brother." Chen Ping'an scratched his head before nodding and replying, "Okay." Qi Jingchun patted the young boy's shoulder and asked, "Do you feel tired after walking all the way to this stage?" Chen Ping'an shook his head and replied, "No, it's been spectacular. Apart from practicing fist techniques, I've also been able to overcome all kinds of challenges and make all kinds of new friends like Brother Su and Zhang Shanfeng. In addition to this, I've also come across many spirits, gods, and ghosts, so I don't feel tired." As if afraid that Mr. Qi wouldn't believe him, Chen Ping'an smiled and repeated, "I genuinely don't feel tired." Qi Jingchun nodded in response. He knew that the young boy was being honest in a sense, and he was indeed truly excited. However, how could he not feel tired after traveling such great distances and encountering so many troubles? He practiced uninteresting fist techniques day after day, and his frail shoulders also had to carry the burden of other people's expectations as well as the difficulties of the world. It was even more important for him to guard against the sinister nature of people's hearts. Thus, how could he not feel tired when dealing with people and challenges, all of which were unpredictable in nature? Chen Ping'an was carrying this heavy burden by himself, yet he was unwilling to have others worry about him. After realizing that Mr. Qi already knew everything, Chen Ping'an immediately blurted out his encounter with the mysterious mountain crossing carp, his experiences in the flowing cloud water alley in Yellow Court Nation, his encounters with Shen Wen in the city god hall of Blusher Prefecture, and the city god's admiration toward Mr. Qi. Wei Bo, who had moved from Go Table Mountain to Cloud Drape Mountain in the small town, the female ghost in the wedding dress with a strange temperament, the beautiful bone ghosts, and of course, that man who wore a bamboo hat. Chen Ping'an talked about Arliang the most, and he also mentioned Arliang's dazzling smile whenever the swordsman talked about Mr. Qi. His face would scrunch up into a smile, yet he would also appear the saddest at these moments. In the end, Chen Ping'an chuckled and recounted how Arliang had been punched down into the mortal world by a single punch from the Dao ancestor's second disciple. After reuniting, Arliang had told him not to worry about practicing the sword yet, as practicing fist techniques to the pinnacle stage was already the same as practicing the sword. Thus, he wasn't feeling too worried at the moment. Qi Jingchen stood side by side with the young boy who was rambling on about his experiences. He smiled and asked, "Do you miss Arliang a lot?" Chen Ping'an looked up at the sky and murmured, "Arliang will eventually return." He then turned to Mr. Qi and asked, "Right." Qi Jingchen nodded with a smile. "Then what about you, Mr. Qi?" Chen Ping'an asked. Qi Jingchen sighed and shook his head. "After accompanying you for all this time, it will eventually be time for me to say goodbye. I've already done everything I can." Chen Ping'an lowered his head and silently stared at his feet. This reply hit Chen Ping'an the same way as Old Man Yang's reply of "wasn't worth it" back in the Yang family's medicine shop. Even though he expected it, it still made him feel very sad. He felt incredibly sad. Qi Jingchen reached over and gently placed a hand on the young boy's head. "Even though I said that my damaged soul is acting as Dao guardians for the three of you, is accumulating all of the spring wind here not a form of me asking you to travel around the world for me? I have no more regrets." He flashed Chen Ping'an a knowing smile and continued, "You can feel sad, but you can also drink wine, right?" The rims of Chen Ping'an's eyes were red as he grabbed the sword-nurturing gourd from his waist and handed it to Qi Jingchen. Qi Jingchen's figure was becoming increasingly faint, and he lazily stretched his back and shook his head with a smile. "You can save my portion for later." Chen Ping'an didn't drink any wine either, and he retied the gourd to his waist. He was afraid of genuinely becoming a drunkard. "Chen Ping'an, do you want me to accompany you to practice the fist technique one last time?" Qi Jingchen suddenly suggested. "The six-step walking meditation?" Chen Ping'an asked in puzzlement. Qi Jingchen nodded in reply. Chen Ping'an took a deep breath before slowly walking forward and calmly throwing a punch. The moonlight was pure, and the Confucian scholar in azure robes walked beside Chen Ping'an and also threw a punch with him. His movements were also calm and leisurely. After finishing the six-step walking meditation, Chen Ping'an came to a gentle stop and didn't repeat the fist technique anymore. He didn't turn around, but instead gazed into the distance, just like that. There was no more spring wind hovering around his sleeves. He knew. This time, Mr. Qi had truly left. 1. A Taoist concept regarding the human soul.